Okay, so good day. For this session, we will talk about coding qualitative research. What are the things that we have to do when we talk about qualitative research? At the beginning, I will discuss an introduction about the importance of qualitative research. What are the things that we have to remember? What should we prepare before the coding? What are the approaches in coding? Then how do we arrive from the codes to categories to themes? And in the latter part of our discussion, I will also cover the trustworthiness and the rigor of doing research that are qualitative in nature, and how do we report it based on the standard protocol. And I will share with you some helpful resources that you can use later when you do qualitative research. So whenever you are doing qualitative research, you need to ask yourself, who are you? Like, what are your background? Where are you connected? What are your competencies and abilities in doing qualitative research? This is very important and crucial because that will establish your validity and reliability on how you write your qualitative research papers. At the same time, whenever you are dealing with qualitative research, you are dealing with people. Hence, it is important that you know who are the people that you're interviewing or who are the people under the focus group discussion. So it also includes their name, their school, their department, where are they currently working, and how do they arrive with their position and their quality of projects that they are doing. One crucial component of qualitative research is your sampling. Your sample should lead to data saturation. So when a certain sample is too small and the data, although it's small, is not saturated, it will not be sufficient for us to arrive with a good research result. It's like picking a cherry fruit. In doing qualitative research, you need to narrate everything. So before you arrive with a cherry fruit, you need to describe the forest. You need to describe what are the trees in that forest. And one of that is cherry tree. And then what is a description of a cherry tree before you arrive with cherry fruit? Because when you just arrive with cherry fruit, without showing to the readers how did you arrive with the fruit, then obviously it will pose a lot of questions later on. Hence, what we are after with qualitative research is the depth or the meaning of the interview that was collected. So the lack of variation or depth would always lead to an inadequate representation of a certain phenomenon or phenomena. And according to some articles and journals, in order for us to publish our research paper that fall under qualitative research, we need to have 20 plus participants as part of our interview or FGD, because for some researcher, that will be enough in order to arrive with certain explanation or to explain the phenomenon that's happening or observed by the researchers. But there are some researchers and experts like Creswell who would say that five as number of participants is sufficient, provided that you have a very high qualification criteria. So in terms of data collection, there are different ways on how you collect data. It includes interview, can be done one by one. Second is focus group discussion, where you invite five people or set of individuals in one sitting, and then you throw a question to them. Another way of data collection is by looking at the records. It could be on the documents or printed material. Another way is through observation, like a field notes, or it could be a nominal group technique, which is shown, the link is shown on the screen. You may explore how do we do nominal group techniques. So let's start with field notes. Field notes is very important when you are doing qualitative research. It's like your reflection paper. Field notes include your recorded behaviors, activities, or even events and other happening in the setting. Meaning to say, when you are doing qualitative research, it is important for you to describe what is the current scenario in the field, or what's happening when you are doing the interview or the focus group discussion. So you are taking down notes of the feelings, of the reaction, or even the reflection about the experiences, their experiences as well as your experiences when you are conducting the interview or FGD, or you are doing the field work. And you note your interpretation about what's happening in the setting, because there is such thing as emic and ethic point of view. So when you talk about emic point of view, you are looking at the perception and the belief and how the participants perceive the interview or the questions. When you talk about ethic point of view, you are dealing with the outsider point of view. Hence, you are no longer looking on their answers alone, but trying to compare some of these particular beliefs, behaviors across country or across nations. Field notes is very important. Hence, there are some few tips that I want to share with you. Number one, you write the field note as soon as you can. So once you have started your data collection, you need to write already the date, the setting and the like. You also take note of the setting. What is the environment all about? Are you located in a conducive environment? Is it air conditioned? Um, is it chaotic and the like? You also fill in the details in your notes as needed, so that it will ensure that your field note is sufficient in terms of description. You also make sure that your field notes are clear and understandable. If you are good in encoding your field notes, then you may do that. But it's also important to take note of written notes or observations. At the same time, when you are already conducting your interview or FGD, you need to immediately use pseudonyms or false names, false locations, so that it will not affect you or the participants whenever they are naming or dropping names during the interview. Aside from that, you also need to include the date, the time, the weather, and the location in your field notes. It's like looking at the map, no? What do we see in the map? So you describe everything. And when you are interviewing the person, the demographics is very important. That's why whenever I ask my students or whenever I do qualitative research, there is a robot photo or aide memoire, and including part of the aide memoire and robot photo, it includes their name, age, and other demographic profile. Because that is very important for me to interpret why the person say so, or why the person answered that questions, or how the person answered the question. So whenever you are doing the field notes, we are not supposed to judge the event. So when you observe something that you think would lead into a certain interpretation, please do not interpret it. Rather, just describe it, because the best person to interpret what they are doing is not us, but the participants itself. So let's have an example of a field notes. So during the demographic data collection, the patient indicated he is married but separated for years and years. So you will notice that the researcher described already what the what is the description of the patient, and how is the patient related or is connected to his or her wife. In this case, um, the wife is the one narrating. And then the researcher mentioned that this person is already separated for years. Then the circumstances are unclear, but the patient indicated that they are amicable. So you will notice that we are maintaining anonymity. We do not describe how is this person uh, can be identified at certain level, but rather we are just describing or narrating what the person divulged to us. No, if in this case the researcher is talking about the relationship of the wife to the husband. So he does have rheumatoid arthritis that's very bad in one of his dominant hand, thus making it difficult for him to write. So you will still see here the condition of the patient. So that's an example of a field notes. So next is memoing. So in memoing, we document our thoughts throughout the data collection and analysis process. So aside from writing the field notes, it is our responsibility to write our memos. And when you get your thoughts or idea, you jot it down bit by bit. So for example, one of the most striking contrasts between survey respondents who graduated in 2000 and 1950s and 1970 is what they seem to value about the experience. So you will see here that the researcher is describing the intrinsic and extrinsic characteristics of a person. However, that description is coming from him or her as a researcher. So part and parcel of writing a qualitative research is to take note of the memos and to describe also what you are feeling, what and how you collected the data, and how will you also analyze it later on. After that is you will be doing the transcription. So whenever you transcribe, you write what is written or said by the participants. We are not allowed to sanitize immediately the transcription because every words that the participant would say has meaning, and it is must be included in our transcription before we do the coding later. So typically when a person interview a person for 90 minutes, it will take us 8 hours to transcribe it because we need to listen and re-listen the audio file, and we need to ensure that we are capturing the correctness of the answer of the participants. So while you're doing the interview, it is also our responsibility to transcribe nonverbal utterances. And this includes sigh, sobs, or laughter. So for example, when a person said, I am happy that my parents are improving. And then I pause and then I cried. So you need to include those nonverbal utterances when I pause and when I cry, because that will give meaning later on when you write the transcription and when you interpret later on those transcripts. So deliver what the participants say. Do not edit their language. If they say bad words or words that are inappropriate, just write it there so that you will when you go back later, you will understand what's the meaning or the feeling of the person when she or he is answering the question. Aside from that, um, you need to ensure the confidentiality of the transcript. So whenever the person is narrating, you can just simply write participant A, B, C, D, or participant 1, 2, 3. And whenever the participant would say words that identifies the real persona or the real name of the person, you immediately replace it with pseudonyms. Like, for example, again, the letters or any name that are part of your list. So whenever we are doing qualitative research, it's a must that we do a lot of transcription. So you need to have a lot of patience to do that. But now that we are in the advent of technology, for example, in my case, um, my gadget has a way to do transcription in English. That's why it's easier when I interview a person in English and in English language, then my gadget, my laptop, and my iPod can write a transcription of the interview for me, and then I will just verify that later on when I re-listen to the audio recorded feed or the audio recording, so that I don't need to transcribe it, and it will not take too much time for me. So there are software and there are gadgets today that can do that for you. If you can avail of that, the better, so that it can eliminate number of hours of writing and rewriting, and spend more time in interpreting and analyzing what was transcribed or appeared in your interview. Another is you use a key. So other readings, so that it will be easier for you to interpret and write the qualitative transcript. For example, letters like projected on the screen, like I for Abby, R for CG, so on and so forth. They use blank for the missing word, and question mark if you are not sure of the word, or it could be a colon when a certain abrupt stop in speaking. So that will depend on you. You need to decide what particular symbol or legends that can be used in order to guide you or help you understand the transcription later on. When your transcript are done, you should read them again multiple times so that you will familiarize yourself with the data, but never immediately interpret or analyze a transcript. If you have done it once or twice, you need to read it around 3 to 5 times before you do the coding. For what reason? So that you can be familiarized with the words, the tonation, and the sentence structure of the participants. And while you are reading it or listening to it, you need to ensure what's happening there and why is it important. Hence, your memo that I mentioned a while ago that are needed in qualitative research is important in order to support what is your observation in the transcription. So let's proceed to the overall approach to coding. There are two ways on how you approach on how you code the transcription. First is the theory to data. It's called the deductive reasoning. Meaning when you say deductive reasoning, there is already set of patterns that are suggested by the theory that would appear later on when you interview the participants. And the other one is called inductive. In the inductive, you know the theory, but you don't begin with the theory. You begin with the data, and then you code the data, and then later on either support the theory or doesn't support the theory, or it could be a way of adding something as additional layer in the theory. So for me, I would rather do the inductive reasoning or data-driven rather than concept-driven. Because when you say concept-driven, if the theory says that there are 5 layers, you will always focus your attention on that 5 layers. But if you are data-driven, you dig the data, analyze the data, do the coding, and try to verify which among these particular construct can support that 5 layers of or 5 domains of the theory that you have read. And perhaps you can add layers to the theory. So rather than having 5, you can add 6 domain. If that will be shown or it will appear in your coding. Hence, if it's a deductive method, you are bound with the theory. But rather, if it's inductive, you can contribute in the extension of the theory. Another thing is that the overall approaches to coding can be deductive when the codes are developed before the coding process begins. For example, if I want to cook adobo, there is prescribed ingredient in making adobo. So concept-driven theory is like if there are 5 ingredients in adobo and I go to the market, I will only look for 5 ingredients. Okay, and that is where I base my codes. That is where I will base my interview guide. That is where I will base the question. And that is also where I will look at the literature. So if you're going to look at the concept-driven coding, there's nothing wrong with that. However, you are bound with the theory. However, when you talk about inductive coding, we are not bound with the theory and there is no pre-developed system of codes or a priori. So we are allowing the words and the answers of the participants to speak for themselves. And then from there, develop codes based on the interview. It's like starting from the scratch. I am not saying that one is better than the other, but what, based on my experience, data-driven coding can allow extension of theory rather than being constricted or bound with the theory. Okay, so those are the approaches. Now, what do we mean by codes? Codes are the process of naming or labeling the data, categories, and properties. Codes could also be words or phrases or meaning units that are repeated in the data. When coding, make sure that you highlight enough text so that you understand why you coded a section the way you did it. So, for example, this is the statement. I noticed that the grand majority of homes have chain link fences in front of them. There are many dogs, mostly German Shepherds, with signs on fences that says, beware of dogs. So you will notice that there are many constructs that can be derived from this, but it will lead to one particular code. What do I mean by that? Notice that the term grand majority of homes have chain link fences. It will tell us that people in the home should protect one another. And one way to protect one another and to ensure that they are secure is by having a chain link fences. It added another statement. There are many dogs, mostly German Shepherds. So notice that adding a different variable such as German Shepherd will give us an idea that perhaps there is a need for security. And there is a signage says beware of dog or of the dog. It gives us an idea that this particular house or household is securing themselves. So from these words or important statement, we can arrive that one of the codes that can be written here is about security. So our first code is security from our statement on the left. So how do we develop coding? So what is the process? So first, we code from the transcription, then later on we sort. And when we sort it, we can develop categories. Then after sorting, we group them by synthesizing their similarities. And that will end up with the themes. And then later on, we theorize. Either we use the existing theory, or perhaps we can add layers, like what I've said, or extend our theory from the result of our interview. So codes are divided into texts or into words or phrases or label. Categories refers to some sort of the codes that are categorized based on how different codes are related or how they are similar to one another. Themes identify the central category. that relate it to one another. So for example, there are 100 codes. From the 100 codes, you divide them into 5 categories or subcategories. So for example, 100 and then around 20 codes per subcategory or category. And then these 5 categories has a central theme or central idea, and that will lead us to the theme. So in a nutshell, it's like coding process is code, categories, and themes. Let's continue. So coding by qualitative design. There are several types of qualitative approaches and design. So you may choose ethnography if you're dealing with certain practices or behavior or agreed phenomenon or practices. Phenomenology on the lived experiences of people. Grounded theory if you want to develop a theory from the process. Narrative research if you're dealing with a person in his biography. Case study if you're dealing with one particular case and you want to understand further this case in a more comprehensive manner. All this research design or qualitative research design would lead to qualitative description. So we need to understand how do we chunk this data so that we can truly develop a theory. So there are different ways on how to do it. You can do it manually, or you may also use a software, like for example, in Vivo. For me, whenever I do manual coding, I use highlighter, colored pencil, or sticky notes so that it can guide me what are the similarities of the codes. But if you're using a software like NBibo, you may also type it and assign color so that you can arrive with or easy so that you can easily identify the similarity of the different codes so that later on it can arrive with certain categories. So there are many types of codes, and I will discuss 2 ways on how you arrive with the right codes. First is what you call the open or initial coding process. In an open or initial coding, you begin with in vivo. In vivo, when you talk about in vivo, this is the real responses of the interview. It's like the actual responses of the interview. That's why I call in vivo, the fresh data. Then, after getting the fresh data, you describe it, no? And then later on, do coding or subcode it. So in an open and initial coding process, you will arrive with your first cycle of coding. Hence, you will see codes immediately. But we are not really sure whether the code is duplicated or it can be discarded. In the second round of coding is called the grounded theory coding process. You use your coding in your open coding process. Then later on, develop some axis or similarity called the eggshell coding. And then later on, decide which one will retain, which one will be collapsed to be added with another codes. So let's start with open coding process. So first, you get the lay of the land by remaining it open for all the possibility. You study it line by line or paragraphs or per segments, and then provide important meaning for every statement that you will read. So for example, I hated school last year, freshman year. It was awful. So notice that the first statement or line or sentence can be coded as hated school. And in these years, a lot better. Actually, I don't know why. I guess over the summer, I'm kind of blank. So we can say that this year's a lot better. And then the third is stop caring about what other people thought and cared more about just I don't know. So stop caring. So you will notice that the coding or codes on the right side are taken directly from the participants' responses. The word hated school, this year's a lot better and stop caring are coming from actually from the participants. So that's what we mean by in vivo. We get the code from the actual responses of the participants. But actually, we are not ending there. We need to improve that. Hence, it is important to do some description. So in the description or descriptive coding, you label the data in word or short phrases, basic topics. Then you can use the interview data, but also you can use the field notes, as your observational notes. So this is an example of description. So for example, these are this is the words, and you need to ensure that you are capturing or describing what is supposed or what is the phenomenon or the feelings or the event that's happening to them. So let me proceed to another example. So for example, the school's multipurpose room function as cafeteria, auditorium, assembly space, meeting space, and study hall. Its portable tables with attached seating fold easily for somewhat quick in transformation and cleaning of the space. So if you're going to code it, the participants would say school multipurpose room. But instead, we use the word school multipurpose space because in the second statement, the participants is consistent with the word space. So that is what we mean by describing. You need to understand fully what the message or what is the statement of the participants before you arrive with coding. And this is an example of subcoding. A while ago is in vivo, directly lifting the words. In subcoding, we are somehow describing what is the statement is all about and analyzing the statement as well. Let's continue. The adjoining media center houses books, a computer lab with 26 stations, so on and so forth. So you will notice that the word media center was mentioned, but there was no word as school media center. But because we can use the first statement or the first sentence, we can refer to school media center. So again, it is not directly mentioned by the participants, but by analyzing, by doing subcoding, and by doing the subcategories and description, we can proceed to this kind of coding. So another is in open coding, you can just simply write the statement and make some description later on. So this is an example of that. And this is what I meant by, sentence by sentence, and then analyzing it, so that you can further enrich all the possible codes in the responses or the answer of the participants. So we will end this session for now, and then we will continue it in a little while. Thank you for listening.